Welcome to a riveting new video from Cryptographics. And today we are talking about what is Bitcoin backed by. And this is the infographic. It's a great question to ask too, because if we're talking about the new currency, the new monetary network that's going to be the store of value and the reserve currency for the world, we should probably ask ourselves, what is it backed by? How do I know it's going to be there for a long time? And is it worth investing tons and tons of money? So we broke it down into, let's see, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 aspects that illustrate what Bitcoin is backed by. And I cobbled together uh, some points from the greatest minds in the Bitcoin space. And so we'll take it one by one and pop into my favorite resources on each topic. Feel free to pause. Feel free to screenshot this infographic and take it and pass it along to people who need to see it. All right, let's get rocking with the Bitcoin monetary network. So, this was a great article that opened my eyes to why Bitcoin does have value. He says Bitcoin is both a payment system and a money. The payment system is the source of value, while the accounting unit merely expresses that value in terms of price. The unity of money and payment is the most unusual feature and the one that most commentators have had trouble wrapping their heads around. So, yes, Bitcoin is a monetary network as well as the currency. You spell Bitcoin with a capital B if you're referring to the monetary network. You spell it with a lowercase b if you're referring to the token. And the article goes on to say the innovation here, even according to the words of its inventor, is the payment network, not the coin. The coin or digital unit only expresses the value of the network. It's an accounting tool that absorbs and carries the value of the network through time and space. And this payment network it's dominating. It is bigger than the next three payment networks combined. It's bigger than the next four banks combined. So it has really already won, and it didn't come this far just to come this far. And we'll dive into the conclusion here. Um, if you have to communicate to a highly trained economist, you'd say, hey, one, Bitcoin is not a standalone currency, but a unit of counting attached to an innovative payment network. Two, this network and therefore Bitcoin only obtained its market value through real-time testing in a market environment. In other words, once you account for the razzle dazzle technical features, Bitcoin emerged exactly like every other currency from salt to gold did. Um, People found the payment system useful and the attached accounting was portable, divisible, fungible, durable, and scarce. A new form of money was born. This money has all the best features of money from history, but adds a weightless and spaceless payment network, one that is reliable and verified in real time, that enables the entire world to trade without having to rely on third parties. Remarkable. All right, back to the graphic. It's also backed by electricity. You might have heard that Bitcoin mining consumes a ton of electricity. So let's dive into that. And people think it's a bug, it's a flaw, but it is actually a feature that electricity secures the Bitcoin network. So here it says today the Bitcoin network is secured by over 10 quintillion calculations per second by servers from all around the world. This makes it the largest computing network in the world by far, and the by far hyperlinks to the fact that Bitcoin is 100 times more powerful than Google when it comes to computing power. Moving right along, a 51% attack. Okay, why does all this electricity and hashing help secure it? Well, a 51% attack can hit the Bitcoin network if one miner or a group of miners acquires enough equipment and mining power to rewrite the Bitcoin blockchain by creating a longer chain of blocks. If they can do this, then they can selectively rewrite the chain, allowing for double spending. The attackers can choose to omit some of the past transactions and create new ones. This is the same as if a hacker logged into an online banking system and deleted some of the past transactions. Pulling off a 51% attack requires a lot of equipment and hashing power, to say the least. The more hashing power the main network has, the greater number of miners would have to band together to accomplish a 51% attack. And also, they'd be highly disincentivized to do something like that because to compromise the network would also make their bounty, Bitcoin, worthless. And we'll get more into incentives as we proceed through the video. All right. Also, it is backed by its utility, so its usefulness. And we use the treasure chest because one of the main use cases for Bitcoin is a store of value. Preserve your wealth over time and space. It's difficult to do that now in today's macroeconomic climate. So we're going to go to our man Michael Saylor for some insight on this one. So he says Bitcoin is the first digital monetary system capable of storing all the money in the world for every individual, corporation, and government in a fair and equitable manner without losing any of it. If that's not intrinsically valuable, what is? So yeah, he says that every single person, every single corporation or entity faces a store of value problem, and that is how to preserve wealth across space and time, especially when uh, currencies are being debased across the world at an increasing rate. So he goes on to say, I think Bitcoin is a solution to a problem, but you have to have the problem to appreciate the solution. So the problem became pretty paramount in March 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, when the cost of capital goes from 5% to 15% for every company on Earth. Now you have to find a treasury solution that would yield more than 15%, says Saylor. And Bitcoin can act as a store of value against monetary inflation for any corporation, public or private, with a cash-rich treasury because they all have a debasement problem, he said, adding that it's a logical solution to the store of value problem. And he is absolutely clinical on this topic. Let's go into a little bit more why he says, it's a better store of value than gold, equities, bonds, real estate, and the primary premise is because those other options almost invariably do not cover the cost of capital, the economic hurdle rate. So he has an example with gold. He says, okay, we have a gold network and we want to move money. So I put 100 million in gold. I want to move it around. Well, it's 25 basis points every time I want to move it around. If I want to move it once a quarter, it's 1% bleed a year. And if I move it once a quarter, if I mine it, it's 2% bleed a year. That gets me to 3% bleed a year. Divide that into 70, and every 22 years, that's the half-life of gold. Energy on a gold network has a half-life of 22 years at best. Furthermore, okay, the reason why gold doesn't work over time is we have two examples. It doesn't work because people produce 2 to 3% more of it every year. And over 100 years, that means you lose 90% of your energy. It doesn't work over time because there's counterparty risk. And that's something that Bitcoin does not have. Let's see. So if gold's sitting in a vault, and we know where it is, and it's under the control of institutions, the institutions are under control of government, and therefore that heightens the counterparty risk because of the centralized nature of gold. So the best case for a gold network is you're going to lose 90% of your energy over 100 years, but it's likely going to be more than that. Okay, and then he talks about why FANG stocks and equities are not, I mean, they're being used as a store of value, but they're not great to be a long-term store of value. Let's see. Commodification and the economic principles behind it actually point towards why that's a really bad strategy for the long run. Because we're early in the digital age, these data monopolies, although they could be expected to persist for some time, years, possibly even decades, it's very unlikely that the large profits they're enjoying today will persist far in the future. What's more likely is that now the standards are established, we'll see commodification of some of these digital utilities that are monopolized today. If history is any indicator, so in that way, the FANG stocks, although they're like a primary store of value today, maybe second only to government bonds, and increasingly now so that government bonds are largely going negative, they make for a really poor long-term store of value. And this also points to Bitcoin and the uniqueness of it, in that Bitcoin is like the ultimate store of value through this lens of commodification because it actually resists commodification. Awesome. Okay, what other problems does it solve? It remittances. Some of the poorest people on earth are being charged 30% on their money to send it back to their family. This is a little graph of the money being transacted in and out of Africa over the course of a year. And we can see that, there's hundreds of thousands of transfers going for hundreds of millions of dollars. Um, what else? It's a settlement network. It's permissionless. It's censorship resistant. It's available 24/7, anywhere, anytime, and the settlements happen at the speed of light. That is freaking remarkable. Back to remittances. Pomp, it says Bitcoin is cheaper and faster than the most popular remittance platform. So we have a comparison here of how long it takes for Bitcoin compared to the most popular, as well as the cost for Bitcoin compared to the most popular. So it's going to start taking over that market for sure. Back to the settlement aspect of it, a quote from the Bitcoin Standard: "The finality of settlement on Bitcoin does not rely on any counterparty and does not require any single bank to be the de facto arbiter, making it an ideal for a network of global peers rather than a global hegemonic centralized order." Hashtag Bitcoin indeed. All right, let's bounce back to the infographic, get a little refresher of where we are. So the monetary network, electricity, its utility, and then in the same vein as utility, its usefulness, it's because of its advantages over gold and over fiat money in terms of the properties of money. So let's go back to a chart. Dan Held has a great article comparing Bitcoin, uh, gold, and fiat's attributes. Also, the bullish case for Bitcoin. That is where this is coming from. So the traits of money. You can see Bitcoin pretty much crushes across the board, except for established history low. And you could argue that it's high because it's been around for 12 plus years. It's this massive honeypot that, governments and hackers would love to take it down. They've been trying constantly for years and to no avail thus far. Durability, also, I'm not sure why that got moderate, but we can see that it really is a 10x at least advantage over gold and fiat when it comes to transferring value over time and space. It's better than gold when it comes to transferring value over space, and it's better than fiat when it comes to transferring value over time. Then we got this great little exchange between Ross Stevens of NYDIG and Michael Saylor on the topic of Bitcoin being the best money ever. It's certainly the hardest money ever. So we'll run down this. It says, "Money is a technology for making our wealth today available for consumption tomorrow. Good money is salable across time and across space. For instance, the British pound has lost 99.7% of its value over its lifetime, not salable across time. Gold grows at 1 to 2% annually, while Bitcoin is an asymptotic journey to 0% inflation per year. Consequently, gold depreciates completely against Bitcoin in 50 years. Additionally, the supply of commodity money is subject to demand. Humans can produce more of it if the price rises. Uniquely, Bitcoin is the first store of value ever in which its supply is entirely unaffected by its demand." We'll get more into this when we talk about how Bitcoin is backed by code. So here he says Bitcoin's better at being gold because it's more salable across time. And he goes on to say Bitcoin is better being fiat than fiat. In conclusion, Bitcoin's the best money we have. However, maybe it's the best money we have ever had. Love it. Okay, proceeding on to the blockchain architecture. It makes it extremely difficult infeasible to compromise the network, and that security is what allows us to trust in its monetary policy. So let's dive into a quick video.
And also, to make sure that there's a standard order to these blocks, we'll make it so that a block has to contain the hash of the previous block at its header. That way, if you were to go back and change any one of the blocks, or to swap the order of two blocks, it would change the block that comes after it, which changes that block's hash, which changes the one that comes after it, and so on. That would require redoing all of the work, finding a new special number for each of these blocks that makes their hashes start with 60 zeros. Because blocks are chained together like this, instead of calling it a ledger, it's common to call it a blockchain. As part of our updated...
Right on. So pretty much the way it's structured, if you want to change one single transaction, you have to redo all of the computing work that's ever been done on the Bitcoin network. That leads to immutability. Once a transaction happens, it is done. There's no one you can call to reverse it. This also enhances the security of the network, and it is also a way of telling time. Like, we have this decentralized network, and everyone needs to agree on the order in which things happen. Where are we for a great description of this? So this is from Gigi, 21 Lessons from Falling Down the Bitcoin Rabbit Hole. Highly recommend this book. Number 17 is about telling time. He says, in a radically decentralized environment, we don't have the luxury of absolute time. Any clock would introduce a trusted third party, a central point in the system which had to be relied on and could be attacked. Timing is the root problem, as Grisha points out, and Satoshi brilliantly solved this problem by implementing a decentralized clock via a proof-of-work blockchain. Everyone agrees beforehand that the chain with the most cumulative work is the source of truth. It is, per definition, what actually happened. This agreement is what is now known as Nakamoto consensus. Satoshi says the network timestamp transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain which serves as proof of the sequence of events witnessed. Without a consistent way to tell time, there is no consistent way to tell before from after. Reliable ordering is impossible. As mentioned above, Nakamoto consensus is the Bitcoin's way to consistently tell the time. The system's incentive structure produces a probabilistic, decentralized clock by utilizing both greed and self-interest of competing participants. The fact that this clock is imprecise is irrelevant because the order of events is eventually unambiguous and can be verified by anyone. Wow. Mic drop. Okay, moving on to cyber hornets, and this could be renamed the four-sided network effects of Bitcoin. So we have companies building upon Bitcoin, we have developers, the developer network, we have people holding Bitcoin, and we have Bitcoin miners as well as nodes. So to go into this, we go to our main man, Robert Breedlove. He says, Bitcoin has a unique four-sided network effect that insulates it from disruption and supports its growth. These are the four constituencies that participate in expanding the value of Bitcoin as a result of their own self-interested interaction with its network. There are consumers who pay with Bitcoin, merchants who accept Bitcoin, nodes that maintain the distributed ledger, and developers and entrepreneurs who are building onto and on top of Bitcoin. This four-sided network effect makes Bitcoin's first mover advantage seemingly indomitable. As an adaptive monetary technology, its network effects encompass the liquidity of its market, the number of network participants, the community of software developers who support it, and Bitcoin's brand awareness. Large investors will always seek the most liquid market for the ease of entry and exit. Consumers, merchants, and developers tend to join the largest of each of their respective Bitcoin communities, which only reinforces their social interconnectivity and cohesion. Brand awareness is innately self-reinforcing, as any crypto asset competitor will inevitably be mentioned in comparison to Bitcoin. awesome. And we also need to talk about the minority rule. And this is a principle from Nassim Taleb. So let's do a quick video description of what it is.
Writings. In his book Skin in the Game, Taleb talks about the minority rule and summarizes it brilliantly as follows. Society doesn't evolve by consensus, voting, majority, committees, verbose meetings, academic conferences, tea and cucumber sandwiches, or polling. Only a few people suffice to disproportionately move the needle. All one needs is an asymmetric rule somewhere, and someone with soul in the game. And asymmetry is present in about everything. What is unique about minorities in the video game?
All right. And let's go to Parker Lewis to finish it off. He goes, Bitcoin and monetary systems are a perfect example of this phenomenon. If a very small minority converges on the belief that Bitcoin has superior monetary properties and will not accept your form of digital or traditional currency as money, while less convicted market participants accept both Bitcoin and other currencies, the intolerant minority wins. This is exactly what is happening on the global competition for digital currency supremacy. A small minority of market participants has determined that only Bitcoin is viable, rejecting the monetary properties of all other digital currencies, while the majority is willing to accept Bitcoin along with the field. Because of its intransigence, the minority is slowly forcing its preference on the majority. In the world of digital currencies, diversifying by picking the field is equivalent of letting the crowd or the intolerant minority choose what your future money will be while resigning yourself to only a fraction of what you otherwise could or would have saved. Love it. Okay, let's go back to our infographic and we're moving on to code. And what I really want to stress here is it's not the code itself that is backing it, but it is the expression, the emergent properties of this network that come from the code that backs it. And I'll say more about what I mean by that. So when we're talking about code, we're talking about proof of work, we're talking about the halving, we're talking about the difficulty adjustment, we're talking about its monetary policy. So when it comes to proof of work, Parker Lewis has a great line. He says, the higher the cost to solve a block, the more costly the network is to attack. The cost to solve a block represents the tangible resources it requires to write history to the Bitcoin transaction ledger. And proof of work also allows for democratic issuance of new tokens. So, where were we? Okay, now we're talking about the difficulty adjustment. And what that is so when miners are mining Bitcoin, if more miners come onto the network, there's going to be a ton of computing power mining Bitcoin, and Bitcoin will be mined a little bit faster than the every 10-minute schedule that it's supposed to be. And so the way to combat that, Satoshi had a genius insight to have this difficulty adjustment, which makes mining Bitcoin a little bit more difficult or a little bit less difficult, depending how much computing power is going into the network. So, what is amazing about this is that, say there's a higher demand for Bitcoin, it's not like we can dedicate more resources and energy into mining Bitcoin and get more supply of Bitcoin. The network is always going to adjust so that the new tokens are issued every 10 minutes, roughly. And so Danny on Twitter, he has a great thread about how the difficulty adjustment works, but the implication, the biggest implication is that it ensures the supply issuance of Bitcoin stays at an expected rate. Remember, each new block creates new Bitcoins. Faster or slower block times affect the rate of new Bitcoins entering the market. In every other asset class, when the price goes up, more of it gets produced, and the supply begins to increase more quickly, which ultimately drives the price back down. So we're about to experience what happens when the human race copes with absolute scarcity, where more or incremental Bitcoin cannot be produced no matter what the demand there is for it. And then, as far as its monetary policy, and juxtapose this to nation states where we have no idea how much money will be in the system at any point in time. This is Bitcoin's monetary policy, and this is exactly how many Bitcoin will be made and how much will be in the system at any given time. So every 4 years, the new supply is cut in half. It's known as the halvening, and it creates a massive supply shock. And with demand being constant or increasing, it causes a dramatic rise in price, and it happens in a stepwise function. Right now, we're at the 6.25 new Bitcoin per block, and the next halvening will happen in 2024. Okay, and so all these things are great, but hey, couldn't we just copy this? Well, not exactly, because the big uh, game changer is that everyone can trust in this monetary policy, and that is because of the organic growth and the path dependent manner in which Bitcoin developed. Parker says, to this day, Bitcoin software code is not money. You can copy the code tomorrow or create your own variant with a new feature, and no one that has adopted Bitcoin as money will treat it as such. Bitcoin has become money over time only as the Bitcoin network developed emergent properties that did not exist at inception and which are next to impossible to replicate now that Bitcoin exists. In quotes, those that attempt to copy Bitcoin signal a failure to understand the properties that make Bitcoin valuable or viable as money. These properties emerged organically and spontaneously as individual economic actors all over the world evaluated Bitcoin and determined to store a portion of their wealth in it. As Bitcoin's value increased, it became decentralized, and as it became decentralized, it also became increasingly difficult to alter the network's consensus rules or to invalidate or prevent or otherwise valid transactions. This is also known as censorship resistance. And so this creates a vortex of incentives. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but more miners creates a more secure network, which creates more confidence in investors and holders, which leads to more users, which leads to a higher price, which leads to more mining, and the process goes on again and again. Okay, so now we can move on to the Lindsay Effect. Bitcoin is backed by the Lindsay Effect. So what is the Lindsay Effect? Basically, the longer that something has existed, the longer its life expectancy is going to be. And so we'll go to our man Till for a better explanation here.
States that the longer something is around, the longer you can expect it to be around if it's robust or anti-fragile. A book that was published this year has a much smaller expected lifespan than a book from centuries ago. Taleb preaches the Lindsay effect of his own work. It's a waste of emotions to answer critics, better to stay in print long after they are dead. This is optionality in full effect. Critics can say whatever they want. There is no opposite to buying your book. So the payoff of anyone speaking about your book, whether good or bad, is asymmetric in your favor. The Lindsay effect also drastically applies to technology. The fork you eat your food with or the wine you dine with have been around since forever, and they will continue to exist long into the future. New technologies, on the other hand, are prone to being replaced by even newer technologies. The Lindsay effect also sums up why I don't follow any newspapers or TV news. They are by definition short-lived. What's relevant today probably isn't relevant tomorrow and most likely not relevant a year from today. Friends and family will tell you about the important events anyway, so don't waste your time following the news. Still talking about time, fragile systems hate long time horizons. Time is functionally similar to volatility. The more time, the more events, the more disorder. This is simply what your grandmother calls experience. The fragile breaks with time. Or as Simonides said, time has sharp teeth that destroy everything. Another quite interesting place to look into antifragility is health, or the concept of via negativa. What we think is the right thing to do is...
All right, thank you, Till. And back to our home base. We're going to move on to truth and trustlessness. verification. Don't trust, verify. You'll hear that a lot in the uh, Bitcoin ecosystem. So let's go to Satoshi, straight to the founder. He says the root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. Oh man, where are we? Okay, talking about trust. Okay, in order to use them, as in currencies and payment networks, you need to establish what's called a trust relationship with them, which is to say that the institution arranging the deal has to believe that you're going to pay. This wedge between money and payment has always been with us, except for the case of physical proximity. If I give you $1 for your pizza slice, there's no third party. But payment system, third parties, and trust relationship become necessary once you leave geographic proximity. That's when companies like Visa and institutions like banks become indispensable. They are the application that makes the monetary software do what you want it to do. The hitch is that the payment systems we have today are not available to just anyone. In fact, a vast majority of humanity does not have access to such tools, which is a major reason for poverty in the world. The financially disenfranchised are confined to only local trade and cannot extend their trading relationship with the world. A major, if not primary, purpose of developing Bitcoin was to solve this problem. The protocol set out to weave together the currency feature with the payment system. The two are interlinked in the structure of the code itself. This connection is what makes Bitcoin different from any existing national currency, and really any currency in history. Love it. And so Bitcoin's ledger is updated every 10 minutes, and we can all verify it independently. Here's a quick little graphic also from Parker Lewis of what centralized monetary system, it's trust-based. There's a central third party verifying the ledgers, and decentralized money, it looks more like this. Beautiful trustless ecosystem. Okay, moving right along. We are at vortex of incentives. And this is just the beautiful part of Bitcoin, is to see it in action. Everyone is acting in their own self-interest, but it all functions in a way to strengthen and improve the network. So, first we'll talk about game theory, especially when it comes to communication and protocols, communication which includes protocols. And protocols want monoculture. They want to converge on one solution. It's known as the Schelling point in game theory.
All other protocols do not benefit from the perpetual struggle of competing markets, as one would assume to be the case in a healthy capitalist environment. Rather, the opposite is true. Protocols tend to converge to one sole. Do not benefit from the perpetual struggle of competing.
Sorry, y'all. We'll start it again, calmly. Let's get back to it.
Properties of communication. We go right in with a quote. Unlike all other protocols do not benefit from the perpetual struggle of competing markets, as one would assume to be the case in a healthy capitalist environment. Rather, the opposite is true. Protocols tend to converge to one sole victor over time, who subsequently becomes the dominant monopoly player within its respective market. But what do we mean exactly by protocols? Is it constrained to computer protocols like HTML, HTTP, and TCP/IP, all proven to be monopoly king within their respective markets? No, not really. A single solution is better than multiple solutions for everything that's about communication. And that makes total sense, because if we each use a different form of communication, we are not able to communicate with each other, which is the whole point of communication in the first place. You have the strongest network effects in communication networks because they clearly become more useful the more people use them to communicate with each other. Other examples, all with equally fascinating origin stories that enjoy the network monopoly effect, include VHS, Facebook, Amazon, Postgres, the English language, the dollar, Google, and so on. There is one binding factor that this broad collection of networks all share in common. They all belong to the sphere of communication. Whether it's VHS recorders that provide an analog interface model to communicate movies from tape to screen, TCP/IP that makes it possible for all email clients to send content to each other, or USB ports that allow multimedia devices to have a direct line of information exchange. Communication is their core function. In any other sphere you can name, whether it be entertainment, sports, consumable or durable good, services, arts, etc., there is no inherent tendency towards monoculture. Now let's think about Bitcoin for a second, because this video ultimately is supposed to be about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is often compared to a protocol or a language, which is clearly from the sphere of communication. Money is a language. It's our way to express value to each other. And yeah, sure, we have many different languages, but when a German talks to a Swede or a Peruvian talks to a Japanese, they will use the lingua franca, which is English. Bitcoin is the lingua franca to communicate value in the next global monetary system.
We'll pause there. Moving on, as far as incentives, I mean, it's right here in the Bitcoin white paper from Satoshi. And he talks about, the incentives for nodes to support the network, incentives to, expend electricity, validate blocks, and basically just behave honestly. Also, when it comes to governments, there's a lot of talk about, are governments going to ban Bitcoin? Well, that would be against their own interests. And it goes back to the prisoner's dilemma. And basically, let's say the two governments cooperate and both of them ban Bitcoin. Ultimately, the ban is going to fail because you just can't ban Bitcoin effectively. But Bitcoin adoption accelerates, fiat currencies deteriorate more rapidly. If, one country decides to accept Bitcoin and one does not, Bitcoin is also going to win because there's going to be capital outflows from the country that banned it to the country that is accepting it. And if nobody bans it, then of course Bitcoin wins. In practice, the prisoner's dilemma is not one-to-one. It's multidimensional, involving numerous jurisdictions, all with competing interests, making any attempts to successfully ban Bitcoin that much more impractical. Human capital, physical capital, and monetary capital will flow to the countries and jurisdictions with the least restrictive regulations on Bitcoin. It may not happen overnight, but attempting to ban Bitcoin is the equivalent of a country cutting off its nose to spite its face. I love it. And then, we can also talk about incentives that face miners, nodes, holders, as well as hackers. So I put this little graphic here. This is also from Parker Lewis. And so if you're a miner, you have the decision to basically do invalid work and not enforce the Bitcoin network. And you're going to incur upfront costs in the form of electricity and the mining equipment. And you're going to get nothing in return because nodes are going to recognize and invalidate your work. If you would like to perform valid work, then you're going to incur the same upfront costs, but you're going to get paid. And so Bitcoin everywhere incentivizes people to act in their own self-interest, and it all works beautifully together to secure and amplify the network. Let's see. Holders, including companies and services. I think the main point here is that it is an open network, and open networks, it's not a zero-sum game. So basically, any addition to an open network is felt throughout the entire network. It's not like if a new innovation happens somewhere in the network that other people lose. It's that everyone benefits. So whether you're a holder, maybe the price increases, or if you're a company that is making it more accessible, or just providing any sort of service or building on top of the Bitcoin protocol. Also, extremely important is that hackers are highly disincentivized to compromise the network, because if they were to try to stash more Bitcoin for themselves, if they compromise the network, they're basically going to bring the value of what they're trying to steal to zero. let's see, where were we? Bitcoin cannot be banned. Okay, this is awesome. So this is a thought experiment on how incentives created the path-dependent dominance for Bitcoin. It's basically a demonstration of rational market actors always choosing the monetary network with the highest amount of security, the highest amount of liquidity, and the highest amount of infrastructure. And to convince rational actors do uh, to not do that would you'd have to convince them to act irrationally for long periods of time. So let's bounce over to Breedlove. He will describe it far better than I can. Okay, first let's talk about path dependence. Path dependence entails that the sequence of events matters as much as the events themselves. So basically, the order in which Bitcoin unfolded matters as much as the code itself. I love his example. You get a dramatically different result if you shower and then dry yourself versus if you dry yourself off and then shower. Path dependence is especially prevalent in complex systems due to their high interconnectivity and numerous interdependencies. Okay. Bitcoin was launched into the world as a one of a kind technology, a non state digital money that is issued on a perfectly fixed, diminishing, and predictable schedule. It was strategically released into the wild at a time when no comparative technology existed. Bitcoin's organic adoption path and mining network expansion are a non repeatable sequence of events. As a thought experiment, consider that if a new Bitcoin was launched today, it would exhibit weak chain security early on, as its mining network and hash rate would have to start from scratch. Today, in a world that is aware of Bitcoin, this new Bitcoin with comparatively weak on chain security would inevitably be attacked. Whether these were incumbent projects seeking to defend their head start, international banking cartels, or even nation states. Here's a little graph of the hash rate of Bitcoin that is protecting this cryptographic um, store of value. All right, so path dependence protects Bitcoin from disruption as the organic sequence of events which led to its release and assimilation in the marketplace cannot be replicated. Further, Bitcoin's money supply is absolutely scarce, a totally unique and one-time discovery for money. Even if new Bitcoin was released with an absolutely scarce money supply, its holders would be incentivized to hold the money with the greatest liquidity, network effects, and chain security. This would cause them to dump new Bitcoin for the original Bitcoin. More realistically, instead of launching new Bitcoin, those seeking to compete with Bitcoin would take a social contract attack vector by initiating a hard fork. An attempt like this was already made with the Bitcoin Cash fork, which tried to increase the block sizes to ostensibly improve its utility for payments. This chain fork was an abject failure and a real-world enforcement of the importance of Bitcoin's path dependence emergence. So here's how Bitcoin Cash is performing compared to Bitcoin. It is something where, yes, you could say the code was improved. It was better on a code level, more functional, but it did not have its emergent monetary properties and emergent trust that Bitcoin does. So continuing our thought experiment, even if new Bitcoin featured a diminishing monetary supply, um, how would its rate of money supply decay be determined? By what mechanism would its beneficiaries be selected? As market participants, nodes and miners jockeyed for position to maximize their accrual of economic benefit from the deflationary monetary policy, folks would ensure that, forks would ensure that would diminish the liquidity networks would ensue that would diminish the liquidity network effects and chain security for new Bitcoin, causing everyone to eventually pile back into the original Bitcoin, just like they did in the wake of Bitcoin Cash's failure. Okay, this is also an important paragraph, and then we're done with this point. Path dependence ensures that those who try to game Bitcoin get burned. Reinforced by four-sided network effects, it makes Bitcoin's first mover advantage seemingly insurmountable. The idea of absolute monetary scarcity goes against the wishes of entrenched powers like the Fed, Once an idea whose time has come is released into the world, it is nearly impossible to put the proverbial genie back in the bottle. After all, unstoppable ideas are independent life forms. So cool. Okay, now we're going to wrap this up. And the conclusion is basically fiat is backed by debt, um, which is owed human time and human life force, as well as the threat of violence. Bitcoin is backed by its utility of the utility of its monetary network and the credibility of its monetary properties. So, a couple points to bring this home. This is also from Parker Lewis on the fact that the U.S. dollar is backed by debt. Super interesting article. Highly recommend. I'll link it in the description. Over the course of the 20th century, the dollar transitioned from a reserve-backed currency to a debt-backed currency. While most people never stop to consider why the dollar has value, the most common explanation remains that it is either a collective hallucination or that it's a function of the government, the military, and taxes. Neither explanation has any basis in first principles, nor is the fundamental reason why the dollar retains value. Instead, today the dollar maintains its value as a function of debt and the relative scarcity of dollars to the dollar denominated debt. In the dollar world, everything is a function of the credit system. Nominal GDP is functionally dependent on the size and growth of the credit system, and taxes are a derivative of nominal GDP. The mechanisms that fund the government are both dependent on the credit system, and it is the credit system that allows the dollar to function in its current construct. Okay, there's a couple more points that I want to pull out from here. Okay. The credit system is orders of magnitude larger than the base monetary supply. Economic activity is largely coordinated by the allocation and expansion of credit. Let's see. Today, there is 73 trillion of debt in the US system, but there's only 1.6 trillion of actual dollars in the banking system. This is how the Fed manages the relative stability of the dollar. Debt creates future demand for dollars. In the Fed system, each dollar is leveraged approximately 40 to 1. If you borrow dollars today, you need to acquire dollars in the future to repay that debt. And currently, each dollar in the banking system is owed 40 times over. The relationship between the size of the credit system relative to the amount of dollars gives the dollar relative scarcity and stability. In aggregate, everyone needs dollars to repay dollar-denominated credit. In a sense, it's kind of like a drug dealer. Get an addict hooked on your drug and you will keep coming back for more. In this case, the drug is debt and it forces everyone on net to stay on the dollar hamster wheel. This dynamic is basically going to ensure that, we continue to practice quantitative easing, expanding the monetary supply, debasing the currency. Again, totally recommend reading this full article. My man Double A on Twitter, he says Bitcoin is backed by natural human incentives. The only logical conclusion is hyper-Bitcoinization. As far as a summary of what is Bitcoin backed by, Parker Lewis says, now that Bitcoin exists, there is a viable alternative to the legacy financial system. Each time the Fed returns with more quantitative easing to sustain the credit system, more and more individuals will discover that the monetary properties of Bitcoin are vastly superior to the legacy system, whether the dollar, the euro, or yen. Is A better than B? That is the test. In the global competition for money, Bitcoin has inherent monetary properties that the fiat monetary system lacks. Ultimately, Bitcoin is backed by something, and it is the only thing that backs any money, the credibility of its monetary properties. Okay, one more time. Here's a quick example of Bitcoin governance. The supply of, so it's all about the trust in the monetary properties, the monetary system. Okay, so In summary, the supply of Bitcoin is governed by network consensus. Bitcoin is governed by a network consensus mechanism, and miners perform a proof of work function that grounds Bitcoin's security in the physical world. As part of the security function, miners get paid in Bitcoin to solve blocks, which validate history and clear pending Bitcoin transactions. Basically, keeps everyone in check. Bitcoin's consensus mechanism and validation process ultimately governs the transfer of ownership of the network, but the ownership of the network is controlled and protected by individual private keys held by users of the network. We'll give one more glance at the infographic, and ultimately, I'm not in this to try to get likes. I'm not trying to get subscribers. I'm trying to basically just summarize concepts in Bitcoin, because I feel like the main barrier to Bitcoin adoption is just the education, and the education that has to happen, or basically the rabbit hole that folks go down, is the same as when Bitcoin had the Genesis block. So Bitcoin is not changing, but we just need to have better education. So if you feel like someone could benefit from this, definitely screenshot it, definitely send it their way. And I hope this was helpful. Thank you and have an amazing day.